Welcome back to another episode of Honest Reviews. Today I'm talking about vanilla or classic WoW class balances to help people get a sense of what they should play. Just as a quick background on myself, I started playing World of Warcraft about a week after its initial release in 2004. I was only 12 years old at the time though, so my priorities as a gamer weren't as refined. By the time TBC launched, I had only reached level 55 on a warrior. While getting to level 55 is an achievement of itself, I didn't do any raiding until many years later when I started playing on a private server. From there I went on to raid all the way up to Naxxramas as a holy paladin with a protection warrior alt. Alright, now that that's out of the way, I'm going to do a quick overview of each individual class and try to talk about each of their specs before breaking down the classes based on what they're good and bad at, like which ones are best for leveling and which ones are best for raiding, etc. I'm going to start off by saying the class you should pick is the one you want to play. It's pretty common knowledge now that the vanilla grind is quite a lengthy one, and if you're not interested in the class you're playing and don't feel properly immersed, you're going to burn yourself out pretty quickly. So pick a class you know you'll have fun on. Every class has at least one viable raid spec, so as long as you don't mind changing to whatever is needed, you can essentially play any class in the game. Let's start with Paladins. One of the most controversial classes, and the class I have the most knowledge on. The Paladin specs are Holy, Protection, and Retribution, with Holy being the only viable raid spec. Paladins bring a lot of useful utility to the table with strong buffs and raid wipe prevention. Their single target healing is unparalleled, but suffers heavily from gear requirements. You'll find yourself struggling in the early days of level 60 with only leveling blues equipped, often requiring a backup healer if you don't want to face multiple wipes in relatively easy scenarios. Later in the expansion, though, they can more than stand toe-to-toe with the other healing classes, and excel in single-target healing, outmatched by none. Paladins have a very rough leveling experience, though, with the only viable leveling spec being Ret, which is a very aggravating spec to play. You essentially give yourself a small buff and right-click mobs until they die. They lack any damage utility, and leveling takes a very long time. Protection is basically just not an option. While they're the only class able to effectively AoE tank, they're unable to mitigate damage as well as other tanking classes, namely warriors. On to the warrior. Warriors are a strong pick for vanilla. Their specs are Arms, Fury, and Protection. One of the rare instances where all three specs are viable, warriors bring a lot to the table in vanilla. While both Arms and Fury are moderately reliant on gear, they both bring really good damage numbers and are unparalleled tanks as protection. The best, in fact. Every guild will have a warrior as a main tank if they hope to do any sort of progression. They suffer heavily in terms of leveling though, needing to stop between almost every pull to eat food to regain health, and having a difficult time generating rage during the lower levels, which all of their damaging abilities use as a resource. Definitely a strong pick for Classic though. Next is the Rogue. Rogues have some of the best, if not the best, damage in Classic WoW. Their specs are Assassination, Combat, and Subtlety. Chances are you'll be railroaded into a spec based on whether you're using daggers or swords, but that's par for the course with vanilla raiding. A good rogue will always be on top of the damage meters in vanilla raiding, and are not particularly reliant on gear, though towards the later raids in Classic, they do get a massive power spike around tier 2.5. The biggest issue with rogue is managing threats so you don't pull the boss off the main tank and get the whole raid killed with a poorly timed tail swipe. They do suffer in leveling though, seeing as how they're mainly a single target class and, like the warrior, have no way of healing themselves between pulls. On to the Mage. Mages are a definite strong choice in vanilla WoW. Their specs are Arcane, Fire, and Frost. They have some of the best raid damage next to Rogues and Warlocks. They also have a lot of personal utility such as Ice Block, Blink, Mana Gems, Food and Water, and persistent slows on almost all of their Frost spells. This gives Mage an upper hand in terms of survivability in any raid and also while leveling. That's what makes Mage one of the best leveling classes in the game. It also makes them one of the easiest to level because of their extreme AoE kiting abilities. Unfortunately, their only viable spec early on is Frost, mostly because of the fire-resistant monsters in Molten Core. Once you progress beyond doing MC regularly and move on to AQ40 and Naxxramas, Fire really opens up as it scales better with gear, with Fireball scaling at 100% of spell power and Frostbolt only scaling at 73%. Next is the Druid. Druid is a strong pick for Classic WoW. They're unique in that they have 4 specs despite only having 3 talent trees: Feral, Resto, Tank, and Crit Chicken. If you plan on doing any raiding, sadly you'll probably be limited to resto, though the odd feral DPS isn't too rare, and even crit chickens have a place, seeing as how they provide a 5% spell crit chance to everyone in their party, which is insanely good for Holy Paladins. As a Holy Paladin main, I may have placed a bit more value on crit chickens than maybe I should have. Nonetheless, they're one of the best utility classes in the game, and a definite strong pick, as they are moderately good at leveling by themselves. Next is the Warlock. Oh boy, the Warlock. What a treat. Their specs are Affliction, Demonology, and Destruction. They are a very strong DPS class, though suffer from the limitations of vanilla WoW, what with the debuff limit. Nonetheless, a good Warlock will always top the charts, and they're one of the only 3 classes that really suffer from the too much threat issue from Classic. Don't watch your threat and you'll pull the boss and piss off 39 other people in the process. They have a strong leveling experience with multiple pets to choose from based on your playstyle. They happen to be one of the most aggravating classes to play though, as they regularly need to farm soul shards for raids. Soul gems, summoning, and hellstones all require soul shards, which you must farm off of mobs. Each mob provides 1 soul shard, which takes up its own bag space and is consumed with each ability used. As such, you'll find yourself spending upwards of an hour before every raid farming the needed shards. One of the only classes that needs to strictly manage their inventory space for raiding, aside from maybe Warrior with all their various resistance gear. Up next is the Hunter. The Huntard is a solid pick as long as you don't mind being the raid's bitch. Their specs are Beast Mastery, Marksman, and Survival. Hunters have relatively moderate DPS, but with how important their other utility abilities are, your damage will often suffer to ensure you're able to trank at the appropriate times. Tranquilizing Shot is one of the most important abilities in the game as it deactivates a lot of abilities that raid bosses use. Without it, you'd surely wipe. Hunters require constant situational awareness, and timing is very crucial, with Hunters often having the sole ability to wipe a raid by missing a trank shot within milliseconds of when it's needed. If you want to sit back and relax while raiding, don't play a Hunter. That said, they have one of the easiest leveling experiences, as having a pet makes all the difference. Next up is Priest. Arguably the best healing class in the game, Priests can spec into Discipline, Holy, or Shadow. Shadow Priests are basically non-existent, as they only become viable with insanely good gear at much later in the expansion. Holy Priests, though, are probably one of the best healers. A good one will always top the charts, and their buffs are insanely crucial to any raid or dungeon group. They are also the only class on the Alliance side to get Fear Ward, restricting any Priest players to play Dwarf, which is insanely good in raids. Priests, unfortunately, suffer heavily in leveling. They have almost no damaging spells early on and rely entirely on smite and wanding mobs. Like Paladins, they have an aggravatingly slow leveling experience, so if getting to 60 quickly is what you want, don't pick Priest. Last but not least is the Shaman. Shamans have the ability to spec into either Elemental, Enhancement, or Restoration. Sadly, Shaman is my least known class in the game, as I only played Alliance, though I do know a bit about them. From what I understand, their best spec is Resto, and they bring strong utility to the raid with their healing totems, mana totems, and fear totems. At some point, Enhancement becomes viable, but not until later in the expansion, and suffer from a strong gear check. Enhancement is also reliant upon procs of Wind Fury. From what I've seen in other videos, Shamans have a moderate leveling capability. Alright, so there's my quick summary. So let's arrange the classes based on their performance in various aspects of WoW. First up is leveling. Leveling is a bit of a pain in vanilla, and often the difference between being a good leveler and a bad leveler is the ability to heal naturally, or summon a pet to taunt for you. That said, here's the list. Coming in at number 1 is the Warlock. With its ability to taunt mobs using their summon demons, heal, and self-resurrect, it's pretty hard to argue that they're the best at soloing content. Number 2 is the Hunter. Similar to Warlocks, their pets have the ability to taunt, and while Hunters can't heal themselves, they can heal their pets, which is nearly as good. A good Hunter can also kite for days. Number 3 is the Mage. The Mage is the strongest AoE kiter in the game, and it could be argued that it's the number 1 best leveler. However, it falls a couple places because AoE kiting isn't always the best way to level, and also takes quite a bit of practice to do properly. It's also a high risk, high reward. If you screw up, you die quite easily. Number 4 is the Shaman. They have a pretty strong overall package with the ability to heal themselves and do moderate amounts of damage. Number 5 is the Druid. A good Druid will almost never die, which makes up for their moderate to low amounts of damage. Number 6 is the Rogue. As long as you're only ever killing one target at a time, you can pretty much blast through any content in the game. As soon as you introduce multiple mobs though, the Rogue struggles until they unlock some of their crowd control abilities like Disorient. Number 7 is the Warrior. Constantly needing to stop and eat food is pretty damn aggravating. As someone who played Warrior from 1 to 55 during actual vanilla WoW, I cannot stress how slowly this class will level. Also expect to spend ridiculous amounts of gold on food. Number 8 is the Priest. Wanting things to death is like beating your head against a brick wall. And number 9 is the Paladin. Literally everything takes a monumental amount of time to kill. Thankfully though, with so many defensive abilities, you'll never have to worry about that because you can just right click and go make yourself a sandwich. Alright, the next category I want to talk about is raid DPS. While this might not be important for everyone, it will be for a large portion of the classic community. So here's my list from best to worst. Number 1 is the Rogue, especially good because they're not as gear reliant as some of the other classes. Number 2 is Mage, followed closely by number 3, the Warlock. Number 4 is Warrior, though be sure to keep in mind that they are very gear reliant. Don't expect to be pulling big numbers as soon as you hit 60. Number 5 is Hunter, though they'll spend far more time positioning themselves correctly in kiting rather than actually doing damage. 6 is Druid, 7 is Priest, which again is heavily gear reliant, and coming in at dead last is the Paladin. Shaman is... I don't know. I played Alliance. What more do you want from me? The healing shard is a pretty easy one, seeing as how there's only a handful of classes that can actually heal. This one has a bit more complexity though, because each healer has its own role. For example, Druids are best at raid-wide AoE healing because of dots, while Paladins are best at single target. As a general rule of thumb though, the number 1 is Priest, number 2 is Paladin, though they're very gear reliant, number 3 is Druid, and 4 is Mage, because Blink and Bandage. Shaman goes in there somewhere, but again, I have no fucking idea because the Horde sucks. And that's it for my Classic WoW class and spec guide. Let me know what you think in the comments, and be sure to tell me how your opinion is much more valid than mine because you have an armchair degree in vanilla raiding. I leave you now with the obligatory PvP video overlaid to some shitty 90s music. See you next time on another episode of Honest Reviews.
Let the bodies hit the floor. Let the bodies hit the floor.